you want to take a trip, or you want to import some raw materials, you go to your bank and you buy the foreign exchange. It was, let me see if I can find a polite word on it.
Fair.
Why did this happen? What was the failing? Indeed, when you look at the performance of the Jamaican economy in the half a century right after independence, on average, we're pretty much stagnated. So the question we asked ourselves as a multidisciplinary group of academics was, why? Why did this happen? What was the failing? And at the end, we came to the conclusion that notwithstanding these advantages, Jamaica made policy mistakes at critical junctures. And when we looked at what were the circumstances under which those policy mistakes were made, we realized it was because those policy decisions were not well informed. That the policymakers did not have access to a well-paid, competent public bureaucracy that had the research capacity to inform policymaking. And we came to the conclusion, the founders, that we should institutionalize the group, form a think tank for the purpose of informing policymaking.
What's a think tank?
A think tank is a research institute. A research institute that, in our case, is dedicated to informing public policy. And so our reasoning was that going forward, if policymakers wanted to enact ineffective policy or perverse policy, then they would have to do so not because they were ignorant, but despite having the knowledge. It would have to be a willful decision. The other decision that we made sometime after that is we wanted to inform not the policymaker. We wanted to inform the public, the stakeholders for each policy decision. So it would be more difficult for a policymaker to get away with a bad policy decision because people would know what questions to ask. People would know to say, why is it if this is the best practice? And this is what the evidence says, that you've made a decision in a different direction. And so from the very start, we put as much effort and as much resources and as much time into communicating the findings of our research as we do into the research itself.
So thank you for explaining. What cycle does your work sort of come out cyclically, sort of with, or is it kind of with a fiscal year, or how does it work?
Well, it doesn't have a periodicity like that. We simply try to identify what are the key policy areas where decisions are going to be made in the medium term, or what are the issues that is not on the policy agenda that we think ought to be put on the policy agenda, which we can do by doing the report and communicating the issue. And once we decide those, then we get the research going, and that determines the timetable. So presently, we publish around 6 policy reports a year. I mean, there is a variability, but it averages out to about 6. And so it's roughly 1 every 2 months.
So who supports this work?
CAPRI's work is supported from 3 sources. We get support from the University of the West Indies Mona campus. We get support from international funders. That would be the European Union, UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, on occasion from USAID, from non-governmental foundations, but much of our funding comes from the Jamaican private sector as an exercise of corporate social responsibility. So we have about a dozen private sector companies that give us an annual subvention to keep our work going. That's important because the cycle of international funding, whether it's a government or a foundation, is much longer. So we need to apply for their funding cycle well in advance and to hone to the themes that are important. And then by the time the approval takes place and the funding comes and the work starts, we're talking 12 to 24 months afterwards. The thing about the private sector funding, it's untied. So we can respond in a much more timely manner to local issues as they develop, as happened with the pandemic. We could do a lot of work around the pandemic and around vaccine hesitancy because we did not anticipate that we would need to have that funding a year before. And the private sector funding that we had allowed us to respond to that and to inform the Ministry of Health and Wellness in how to engage the public.
Is there anything, I guess, what's the most exciting thing for you about working at CAPRI, and the most challenging?
Well, the most exciting thing about working at CAPRI is to get to work with an interesting and brilliant set of people who have great ideas that I learn from. And one needs to inculcate that in hiring. Pay less attention to the technical skills on the resume and more attention to the non-narrow academic ability and the personality of the person. The idea of doing something that is sort of objectively important, that the work we do, to the extent that it influences public policy and public opinion, affects a lot of people, affects people's lives. And that is rewarding. The challenge is, every day is a challenge because you want to do what you do better than you did it the day before. So we're a learning organization. And when we publish a report and we have a launch event and it goes really well and we high five, then the very next day we have a meeting where we itemize everybody. We go around the room and everybody says what they noticed that went wrong. So the next time we can do it even better.
Is it ever hard for you to not get caught up in what's happening politically?
Engaging politically is based on a single criterion. What is good for the livelihoods of everybody in the country? So it only is politically adjacent because economic issues are politically sensitive. But my focus is what is good for the economy and the broader society. I am personally indifferent to the partisan impact. And one of the most amusing things and equally infuriating things is no matter what I post publicly, you're guaranteed that people are going to find a partisan angle and make it, and try to diminish its meaningfulness. But I am very clear that I personally have no party affiliation. And I can tell you, without giving you the details, that my vote has gone back and forth over the years. It is based simply on what I think is in the best interest, based on what they say, based on what their manifesto says, and based on what their campaign speeches say, and what I think works for the economy, and what I think is just, partisan nonsense, of which there is a lot. But I am not interested in the partisan side of it. I'm only interested in what's good for the country. And when I say what's good for the country, this is not in a sort of a high-minded sense. Okay? My mind is not higher than anybody else's. This is simply based on the economics I know.
So based on the economics you know, you were around at the time of independence and you're here today, what do you think is something that, like one or two policies that we could return to or perhaps adapt again that would actually help things now?
Most of my experience as an economist living in Jamaica, as you would imagine, has been frustrating. Just like how you're a doctor is frustrated at, the things you eat. So, because politicians the world over are not known for their stellar economic policies. Politicians exist to get elected and to feel the cheers of the crowd. So any economist is going to be frustrated by the economic policies of your country. However, if I had been told 10 years ago, what are the policies and the policy platforms that Jamaica was going to adopt over the subsequent 10 years, if you had told me that 10 years ago, I would flat out not have believed you. Because over the last 10 years, Jamaica has done an incredible job of improving its economic climate. It has brought down inflation and created a stable inflationary environment with an independent central bank that has an inflation target, which has stabilized the exchange rate. We have invested in infrastructure. We have made it easier to do business and to pay taxes. We have brought down the public debt from an eye-watering 145% of GDP down now to close to 60% of GDP, which is a level at which it even doesn't matter. And that creates a sense of stability that you don't think the government is going to default, in 6 months' time, and the effect that's going to have on taxes and on the exchange rate. So Jamaica has done an incredible job with economic policy over the last 10 years. And all I hope for at this point is those policies and that mindset and the fiscal responsibility that Jamaica has exhibited continues. And if that continues, it's going to be a good time in Jamaica for everybody.
Well, I love to hear that it's not all bad. Okay. And the last question about economics is about us recently hearing that we have the lowest salaries in the region. Do you have any comments on that?
So that gets the prize for being the least meaningful thing that could have been said that has had the most impact. The average level of salaries and the GDP of a country, GDP is just a measure of the total production, are just two ways of seeing the same thing. So we know that on a per capita, per person basis, Jamaica is one of the poorest countries in the region. You already know it has the lowest salaries because those two are the same thing. In other words, you can't have salaries that can buy a lot of the product if you're not producing a lot of product. The salaries can only buy what you produce. So that is not news. And when the economy starts to grow, the salaries will rise.
Okay. All right, thank you for explaining.
In fact, that is so unimportant, you can edit it out.
I think it's important to keep because we are very, especially online, right? If it's a headline that's gonna grab, which is why they post things the way they do. But a lot of people don't necessarily understand that it's, the other side of the same coin to what you're saying. So I think it's important we can decide.
But also, the reason why I say, and this you will edit out, the reason why I say that it's so unimportant you can edit it out is not for you to edit it out. It's for to use that comment to evidence why I think it's unimportant.
Sure.
So you can leave it in.
Sure, absolutely. And so this lovely home that we're in, you said you acquired after your academic retirement. What was that like for you? Like, you lived in university housing, which was provided. Was that very intentional? You said you waited, but what was the intention behind waiting until everything, like you were done with UE, as opposed to before looking for something that you wanted?
That was strictly an investment decision. That before I needed to find somewhere to live on my own, then I determined that there were investments that had a better return than real estate. So I deliberately did not buy real estate and made other investments and then used the higher return to buy a better house.
What kind of advice would you give to people now? House prices are ridiculous. Like, how do you advise young people everybody wants to own a home, but it seems impossible? What do you say?
So the first thing is to get over that everybody wants to own a home business. There are two factors here. You need somewhere to live, and you should invest. There's no reason to marry those two together. If I decide that I'm going to go into farming, the fact that I love mangoes doesn't mean I should farm mangoes. What I should do is I should farm the thing that is going to give me the best return and use the money to buy mangoes. Same thing with houses. You should make the best investment you can. That might be real estate, it might not. It might be bonds, it might be the stock market. It might be, your cousin's sports bar, but hopefully not that. And even if it's real estate, it doesn't have to be the house that you want to live in. If you can get a good deal on a 3-bedroom in a rising neighborhood, but your personal needs, because you don't have any children, and maybe you don't even have, and you're not married yet, your personal needs for living might be just a studio, then it makes sense to invest in the 3-bedroom and live in the studio and pay rent. So just separate those two decisions, because there's no reason to marry them. So that's the advice I would give.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And so we're coming to the end where we give tips for people who want to repatriate. So there are 3 things I'll ask everyone to share. But before we do that, is there anything you want anybody to know about yourself, about CAPRI?
One practice that I think is important for everybody is to make sure you learn the lessons of your own experience. You go through life, you make a lot of decisions, you observe much of what is going on around you. Learn the lesson. And some of those lessons I've mentioned already in this discussion. Don't overweight what school tells you erroneously about your ability and your capacity. Set a goal and set out on it. Don't feel that you have to plan every last step and have everything lined up to be able to embark on that journey. Identify what is the first step and take it. In deciding what that goal should be, Don't limit it to what you think your current capabilities are. Reach for a high bar. So pay attention to the lessons. Be conscious of the lessons. What is the lesson I should learn from this? One of the lessons I've learned from my own life, and it probably is the most important lesson, is values. Many companies have a staff retreat and decide what the company's values are. Or the founder will say these are the company's values. And they print it on a poster and they hang it up in the lobby. And nobody pays attention to the values. Okay? There's a famous example of a big American company that collapsed in a scandal of accounting fraud where they were misleading investors about their profitability. And the first value on their list was integrity. And Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, says that if you're going to have values, stick to them. When you face a decision, look at your values and make a decision consistent with your values. And what I want to add to that is that people should do that with their personal lives. My advice, which I wish I'd given to my young self, or if I would give to my young self if I could have the conversation, is decide what values you want to have. Decide if hard work is one of them. Integrity, honesty, commitment, loyalty. And in doing so, then measure your decisions against those values. Because you want to be deliberate when you're not doing it. So honesty doesn't have to be a value. If you want to be a liar, knock yourself out. Just make sure it's on your value. Okay? I am loyal, I am hardworking, and I lie. But don't tell yourself that honesty is one of your values and then you go and lie to everybody who's important to you. And this has come to me because of my personal experience that has led me to make the mistakes I've made in my life. So, pick your values and recognize the ones that you cannot stick to. Recognize them and be deliberate about it. And just to make the point, not everybody wants to have loyalty as a value. Loyalty is tricky. Do you want to be loyal to somebody who is behaving in a way that you don't approve of? So, I value integrity more than loyalty, because there's a bit of a trade-off theory. You can have integrity and loyalty at the same level. So my point is that as a person, try to write down what your values are and confront your values with your actual decisions and make sure they are consistent.
What's your top value?
One of my values is to be reliable. To do what I say I'm going to do if I make a commitment to other people. So if somebody calls me and says, listen, I need to take up your whole Sunday morning to interview you, and I say, okay, I'm not going to call you the day before and say I changed my mind, I'm going to go to the beach. Because people make decisions based on what you've committed to. So being reliable to commitments you have made is one of them.
Okay, I only asked for one, so thank you for sharing. So now you know a little bit more about Dr. King. If you don't know anything else, one of his core values. So the very last thing is 3 tips for anyone who's trying to repatriate, and it doesn't have to be to Jamaica.
The country may have changed from the time you left it because circumstances are different. So you have people who go away to school, and this is, they are 22 and it's only been 4 years and they've come home for every holiday. Or you have people who migrated to England in 1960 and have had little contact. So you need to research. You need to gather information. You need to really understand what you're coming back to. And in particular, the circumstances in the specific location that you're coming back to. Secondly, do have a plan for what you're coming back to do. Now, this does not have to be an ambitious, life-changing plan, but just have an idea. And again, it depends on your stage of life. So when I came back, I wanted to be an academic. So I knew where I was going. It might be career-oriented, or if it's later in your life, it might be a hobby or a charitable effort you want to get involved in. But have an idea what you're going to do. Don't come here and then get up the next morning and say, okay, what now? And the other one is, and again, it depends on stage of life, you do want to come back at a time when your material circumstances are going to be able to look after yourself. So if you're early career, then you want to have a fairly good idea that your career prospects are going to be able to pay your rent and buy gas. And if it's later in life, then you have to have made the investments to be able to live from that.